Fantastic. Well, I'll get cracking then. Thank you for that introduction, and apologies for all the fiddle caused by tech issues and for me not being there physically in person. I'm very conscious that I can't read the room, and I'm about to talk about climate change, which is something that's quite divisive and quite emotionally activating as well. So forgive me if I seem insensitive to what people might be feeling, but if you are finding anything difficult, call on your own resources, and if you need to leave the room, I won't see, so go ahead and do that. Some slides, and I'll try and speed up my presentation. Casey, go for the. But, there is, and if you do strong disagreements with anything I'm talking about today, hopefully I will leave some time for that at the end. I am conscious about how it's such a polemic issue. So intergenerational engagement for climate change, resilience and mitigation, that's quite a mouthful, but in a nutshell, this is all about how those bonds we have between young people and old people are not only essential for us to weather the storm that's coming, but also society together. So, really face what's coming together with strength. That argument that I hope didn't see of today. My name is Dr. Louise Edgington. I'm a climate specialist, educational psychologist, and the majority of my work really is with children and young people, particularly through schools. So I do workshops and presentations, mainly to teachers, a resource then, direct with children and young. I hold sort of support as well to process their own emotion in the staff room. It's spent on national projects and various campaigns and work. And I just thought I'd take, in seeing as I understand this is a room full of mental health professionals or sort of professionals, just to flag up the Climate Minds Coalition, which is a project I'm currently chairing at the moment. It's UK focused, but we're really trying to amplify the professional voice about the impacts of climate change on children and young people. So I'm there representing the British Psychological Society. I sit on their climate group, but I also work with Climate Psychology Alliance on the right over there, and I sit on the Imperial Climate Pairs working group, expert working group as well. So do check us out online, particularly if you are a member of any of these organisations. What I was going to look at today, in two parts. Let's look at one of a very big question, but I think it would be helpful for me to just a bit about the understandings and the position that I'm coming from today. As I said, I'm very conscious that in a room full of people I haven't met and can't see, there's going to be differing views. Physics at university originally, which included atmospheric physics, climate change physics, and energy studies. So I do have that grounding in science. However, if there are any questions at the end, happy to take them. I'm conscious that people are exposed to lots of different things and it can get messy. So we're going to run through the existing picture as we see it, and then really take a look at some of the risks of what could happen in the future unless we address the intergenerational relationships. This first half of my talk is quite difficult. It might feel quite challenging for some of us, so I just kind of want to give you a heads up about it. Triggers things that you're not yet ready to. I did that at the end of my talk today, at least have an appreciation for why, as adults, it is our responsibility to look at these difficult topics and to really be honest about the situation that we're in, because we owe it I think, to children and young people to be grounded in reality. The second half of what I'm going to look at is what we can do. So trying to think about actually how strengthening intergenerational relationships, strengthening that parent-child or carer-child or grandparent-child connection is not only super important for young people to have that resilience, but it's also really important for society as a whole to be functioning stable and making sound choices. Okay, so let's dive in then to the first point, the current context about climate change. This sort of guiding that I go back, therefore, we must look upon the decisions we take today through the eyes of future generations to be guided by the concept of intergenerational equity. Are we handing children a world that is livable? Are we thinking about their experience in relation to ours? Are we aware of these injustices? And are we attempting to do right by children and young people? The current picture is concerning. If you're not familiar with the climate stripes, this is an attempt to show global temperature average changes year on year. And this was really done, these stripes, it was done as an attempt to help us visualise that climate change isn't linear. We don't just have a nice graph with incremental temperature increases year on year. It got as an exponential curve, which is concerning. But to say that, we need to be aware that the experience of children and young people is going to be very different to our lives thus far. And of course the injustice of this is that children and young people are those that have done least to cause these warming effects. Just also like to take a minute today to acknowledge the climate justice issue of different populations around the world. By and large, the Global South are the ones that will really experience the worst of climate impacts. Really, that I also need to acknowledge, just talking about climate change nowadays, the bottom down here are the biodiversity stripes, so a similar attempt to illustrate the decline. I've heard it said a few times, I've read a couple of papers, they estimate that there's about 150 species lost per day. We are in scientifically a sixth mass extinction, which I personally find deeply troubling. And I don't wish to cause us alarm today, but we do need to hold these things in regard to children and young people. Obviously, these factors are interrelated. And when we look at the impact of climate change, nature, growth of food, we then can very quickly see how that's actually really connected. War and sort of technology advances, they all interplay with each other in a very complex, very messy way. And a lot of people are referring now to the poly crisis, this acknowledgement that actually all these different issues we're facing are connected, and they're all far too complex for us to hold in our brains at one time. It's very messy, and this is how the misinformation and sort of post-truth narratives can get traction is because it's actually really hard to understand the whole picture. I think I also just want to flag that the term meta-crisis is being used increasingly nowadays, and that really relates to the sort of understanding that's facing underlying all of these issues. And I'm increasingly quite line the polycrisis or meta-crisis. It is, we on average are connected from nature, disconnected from other more and more, and we're disconnected from our own worlds and ourselves and our emotions. You know, it's difficult to just sort of turn into process or substance that it, discomfort.
Sorry, Louise, if I just interrupt a second. We're having some connection issues, so you keep freezing. So if you could turn your camera off, then we can hear you, and you won't keep stuttering.
Ooh, okay.
That's okay, sorry.
How's that? If I carry on now?
Yep, keep going and hopefully that might happen. Thank you. Do carry on.
That's okay, where was I? Yes, there was a essential question of there. Just to throw it in there, we need to be aware of, but aware of it. One that has a smartphone goes to school, conversations around some of these issues, and the risk is to incorrect explanations or narratives around these kind of issues. So how does it affect children and young people? A lot of different ways, and I don't have to today, but I think the most literature out there was the Lancet, done 3 or 4 years ago now, of a 10, 25-year-olds, various questions, what they thought about the future with regards. And with the exception, I think Finland was the lowest there, but we still have them, young people, believing that the future is frightening. And my point to you today, they have good reason to think that. It's not a response. I'm more concerned with the range of responses that I'm seeing and hearing in UK schools. So, stress. What we're seeing now is the belief in populist politics, turning to alternatives to make ourselves better. And also, we're hearing a lot about apathy, particularly young people of secondary school age, adolescents, where they're just kind of checked out and seem not to care. Now, why would these responses are? Well, they are, and can actually be attributed to this fight, flight, or freeze response that we see related to, when we're threatened, how do we respond? It makes total sense to want to difficult feel, feel like we can't do anything about it. Flight will, they will run away and there's, if we also feel very disimpact. And I would eco-emotions, having tea is actually probably response, but engaged, it shows that in a sort of denial state of solution. Okay. I'll just briefly take on attachments in largely Western society. Now, I'm going to talk in generalisations here, so please forgive me. I'm clearly not referring to everybody or every culture or every family. But let's just have a think about this together. Now, I don't wish to teach you subjects, but just attachment theory, you'll all be aware that it's one of the most robust pieces of psychology we have. Despite its cultural criticisms, it is almost universal in terms of this innate drive that young people have to form a bond with a caregiver. What's often neglected, I think, especially as children get older, is the understanding that the quality or the balance of we get into a clearly there's going to be a greater need for exploration, but young people do still need that containing, secure adult to be there for them, to help them navigate the world and learn how to regulate their emotions. So, this graphic that I think I got from Instagram, I can't remember now, it's really demonstrating what is self-evident to many of us, that attachments in childhood affect the quality of our adult relationships. But what's often overlooked, I think, is the way in which our attachments actually affect our behaviour in school, the way it affects our attainment, and also our relationship with authority. In the 10 years that I was working in a London schools as an educational psychologist, I'd see a lot of children who'd been excluded or had behavioural issues. And in every single case, they had insecure attachments and they were struggling to learn, to press on in their life or even engage. So, hopefully, secure attachment, sense of intergenerational trauma, necessary to function well, to be able to make informed decisions, for citizens to be able to carry out their day-to-day activities and support each other. So it's important for stability. Now, just taking a look at a trend that I think is self-evident actually over the couple of 100 years. This individualism, certainly in Western societies, where perhaps in some we're moving perhaps away a village support. We're in a community where everybody knows each other. And in some places in the world, I'm moving more towards the single parent family models. Now, I'm not here to criticise any of that at all. My argument really here today is about attachment relationships of child. Clearly there's a higher, when those go, losing that attachment figure. When attachments go, reason for that, we often think about adverse childhood experiences, such as bereavements, natural disasters, domestic violence or other abuse situations in the home, and then the knock-on effect that has on intergenerational trauma. So, when a parent is affected or unable to be truly present to contain a child's anxieties, it's almost like they become unavailable to the child emotionally. And so that attachment relationship is lost. Now clearly, if you're living in a big community or sort of tribal society, you're going to have many other backups, and that child is okay. Even in a nuclear family, when you still have one stable attachment with a caregiver, the research seems to suggest that we're still all right. It's when you don't have a backup attachment relationship that the young person often themselves suffers. And certainly I think what we're seeing increasingly is that they then turn to someone else to attach to, and oftentimes that is a peer, if they don't have a supportive adult in the world. And again, sometimes these peers themselves may be, and that leads to this kind of picture. Now the problem with peer group attachment, so I'm sure you're all aware really that while you can have friendships that are quite warm and loving, genuinely, there is always going to be that conditionality that friendships can and do fall apart sometimes. And if a young person is peer attached, the impact of that we now know is actually it's the highest risk factor for suicide in young people is when peer relationship and they don't have a nurturing intergenerational attachment to an adult. So this isn't to all of this isn't to say that young people shouldn't be having peer relationships. Of course they should, but if that's the only thing they have to guide them in the process of development towards adulthood, they're going to be guided by some kind of misinformed values such as conformity. Often it's quite superficial, are you wearing the right things, are you using the right language? And there's also going to be fewer limits and boundaries for safety. So in adolescence, we know that the adolescent brain is primed to take more risks, and so that becomes part of the culture a bit. So it's not ideal. Okay. So that's a very brief look at some tricky situations that we're already facing. With another deep breath in and an awareness that I'm talking about some challenging topics, I'd like to just now take a look at 3 future pathways that we would like to avoid. 3 ways in which generational relationships may be in a kind of ecological crisis. I've got 3 pathways here, and that's huge debate topics. But I'm actually going to invite you to a piece of paper and a pen and just scribble down the 3 that I'm going to pose pathways. And I'd love to get into a debate. But perhaps it's something you might just like to ponder for the rest of the day, or perhaps over your coffee break. So we're going to look at the direct and secondary impact of climate change. So how does climate change affect of betrayal and look on the care for elderly people. Okay, so firstly, direct and secondary impacts. Now I mentioned adverse childhood experiences before. I'm sure you're quite familiar with this framework. So my question to you is, as we enter an era of increased climate and ecological events, how might that generate further adverse childhood experiences for some children and young people? I'm going to be quiet for just a moment here and allow you to look at these different icons, scribble the question down, and just have a little think about that. Doing the example I've got up there, for example, in a heat wave, which leads to drought, which leads to crop failures, how might that impact a family's functioning? We know that extreme heat for resources as well. Likelihood of between the war. Okay. Is when we're a bit more difficult, that is direct increase in success that people know as a risk on their account. I'll move on to the time, I think. The second pathway is more about young people's perception of, it's referred to as moral injury actually, and it's this idea that, quite rightly, there are many young people out there angry and quite betrayed at what seems to be adults around them not taking enough action to safeguard their futures, but also this sense they're being sometimes ignored, sometimes directly told they're wrong from the adults who are supposed to be taking care of them. And actually I'm increasingly hearing, certainly Hanan Hicks in the author of that study earlier, she's increasingly talking about this as like abuse. She's likening it to abuse in the way that harm is being done through neglect, and then we're covering it up by we the adults in the world. Of course, everything I'm saying, by the way, is there's going to be exceptions, there's going to be examples of better practice. So please know that I know that. My question to you to scribble down now and to perhaps ponder for the rest of the day or over your coffee break is, what has been your experience with climate tension in your own intergenerational relationships? What has been your experience with climate tension in your own intergenerational relationships? Certainly, for me, when my parents were still around, the conversations I had with them along the lines, they'd say, "I'll be dead by then," or "This won't affect me," or that those kinds of conversations for me did feel incredibly. They felt like a betrayal. They felt incredibly hurtful, and I do think there is an additional harm that can be done through neglecting tech. Pathway then, and again, acknowledging that these are what ifs. They're not necessarily going to play out, but they are risks we need to be aware of, I think. So the third way in which, and I'm sure there are more ways, but the third way I'm presenting today that climate change intergenerate is through this decline in birth rate. Clearly there are many the decline in birth that's occurring in some countries, not all. It's not just climate change, but it is a factor that lots of people in the world put some evidence up there. Debates that I see maybe people in their 20s having quite a lot about, is it responsible of me to have a child? Am I going to be bringing them into a stable world? So the consequence of this clearly is that we're going to be perhaps moving into an inverse population pyramid scenario where we do have an ageing population where there perhaps, and who knows how old they are, but perhaps there are not enough people of working age to support. Who knows if that will happen? But if it does, my question question for you to ponder, scribbling it down now, thinking for the rest of the day and perhaps over coffee, is who should carry the financial and practical care costs for an ageing population? Is it fair to expect younger generations to do this when they didn't? The crisis, and they need their own resources to face the crisis for themselves. I don't know. Okay. Who should carry the financial and practical care cost for an ageing population? So, putting those three pathways together, this is really basic. There is a educational myth, book, The Wall, which is a sort of dystopian novel, sci-fi. It's set in the UK, whereby there's an enormous wall surrounding the UK to prevent all the billions of climate migrants from getting in. And young people love this. They choose themselves. And there's just this paragraph there that beautifully illustrates the risk of this rift around parenting. None of us can talk to our parents. This is the checklist. By us, I mean my generation. People born on knows what the problem is. Diagnosis isn't even controversial. It's guilt. Mass generational guilt. The olds feel they irretrievably effed up the world, then allowed us to be born into it. You know what? It's true. That's exactly what they did. They know it, we know it, everybody knows it. So that's the situation we really need in the face of climate crisis. Our efforts to nurture it on intergenerational form. And to provide and practical resilience to young person, but it's also going to knit society we need now more than ever, aware of this and ways in which we're othering more, I think, than easily less than we can do. Well done for sitting through that. Find it hard to look and think about this. But I think it's important that we do it. Like to think about how can we use our skill as individuals within our own family to curate this situation, really prevent rift. We're going to use an art to help us thinking about all our needs. So that for now. I'm not sure people in the room are framework, but trauma-informed that the UK helping to heal traumatised children, help them re-establish attachments and connect in settings. So it might be used by schools to help children settle back in, if you will, and it's say foster homes or people who have adopted children as well. I think in the blurb I did suggest I was going to look at Maslow's hierarchy as well. And I do have a slide just to say that actually very similar. Like we've got that's acutely and emotionally. There's a sense that pyramid, or we move up there's emotional regulation, so coping with feelings and validating them, having that attuned relationship. And then at the top we've got the competency pieces, which is more about cognitive skills or play, and that sense of engagement with the wider world, so that exploration piece as well. So we're going to actually look at each of these considerations when we're trying to really rebuild and strengthen intergenerational relationships with a climate lens on it. So I'm going to start at the bottom with attachments. I'm conscious I'm using whole. So, at the very least, I strongly believe, and this is a lot of outward schools, is our basic supporting young people, I think, should providing them with a safe environment. The climate and ecological crisis that's now showing that we are taken seriously. So if we live in a risk of flooding or a risk, whatever it is, being real about that risk, and that helps to keep children as best we can. We also need to be showing that we're taking steps to safeguard their future through mitigation actions, which is reducing our costs, engaging them. To be demonstrably engaging in these activities and involving children too, so that they can really see that we are doing our best to watch out for them. And maybe it might not feel like we're doing enough, but we are at the children and young people that this is what this is going to do, is to avoid additional moral injury, that sense of betrayal, that not doing enough. Another important point here is to really make sure that we are taking responsibility and we're not dumping responsibility onto young people. So on the left here, just we really want to make sure we're avoiding this your generation will save the planet narrative. That's incredibly uncontaining for a young child to hear that they're responsible for themselves. It's like parentification. So we really need to show that we are leading the way and keeping them safe. So that's the physical secure base. I'd like now to think for a moment about the emotional secure base. Now, a lot of this will be very familiar to you all, I'm sure. But it's really that sense of attunement, that sense of, are we emotionally regulated ourselves? Are we present? Are we listening? And are we providing that environment of unconditional emotional acceptance? Now, for climate change, I think what many parents struggle with is that might come up. I do think it's incredibly common when some young people become wise to the state of the world. They're angry, and rightly so. And I think that our challenge is to be able to sit with that anger, and I think it's lovely actually for people that can to repel, to take on their proportionate part of responsibility for being an older person that has been a part of the systems that have got us into this mess in the first place. So, I apologise to my own children for my part in the past. But not everyone likes to do that, but I personally think it's a beautiful way of providing this unconditional emotional acceptance. But the other thing we need to do is provide age-appropriate truths. Now, It's a super common fear that I hear from teachers and parents all the time, which is that they don't want to open a can of worms, they don't want to upset a child. And I do understand that. But we need to remember, much like other difficult topics, like death of a loved one, if we are hiding truth from young people, we are actually doing them a disservice. They won't be able to then trust us to be telling them the truth in the future. And we're not actually equipping them with the knowledge to live in the world that they live in. So it's, in a sense, it can be incredibly hard to know what to say at the right age. I would argue that if you have established that tuned relationship with a young person, you'll have a better sense of what age-appropriate messaging is. But if you'd like some pointers, I've got this free, which does go age and examples that can be appropriate at different ages. Okay. So that's attachment, establishment space. Next, we move up the ARC framework to regulation. Now, this is emotional regulation. This is beginning to help young people learn the skills of navigating their own inner world. Now, you're probably, again, familiar with the coaching on the right. This is, if you're not familiar, beautiful framework that kind of mimics what ideally should have happened as children in the book, where you have an adult being attuned to a child, commenting on their emotions and helping them connect with the feelings that is provoked at the same time, helping them develop the language for it, feeling that they're heard and seen, and then working through the problem together. This really comes back to the idea that we want to be helping children to recognise their own emotions in regards to climate change, so that they don't try and run away from them and engage in all these conspiracy theories, or indeed just switch off altogether. Our task is to lean into the difficult feelings and work through them. Now, we can only do this if we recognise the principle of containment, this idea of the oxygen mask, whereby you'll be familiar with when you go on a plane, they tell you to fit your own oxygen mask before attempting to help somebody else. And it really is this idea that the primary task of adults, caregivers, practitioners is really to do our own work around our feelings in regards to climate and ecological crisis. Because unless we have engaged in that process, spew our emotions over, block their attempts to communicate with us. So staying on the regulation piece, there are lots of different ways that adult parent practitioners can explicitly help teach emotional regulation as well. Actually, there are some very specific things around this. There's a lot around the habits for resilience, so this is stuff like limiting your news consumption or making conscious effort to look at as well with regards to the progress that we are making in the climate landscape. There's a lot around nervous system regulation as well. So, if somebody is experiencing feelings of panic and overwhelm, sometimes people can get really stuck in that because they have this awareness that it is a real problem. It's not always caused by an unconscious automatic thought that, say, social anxiety might be. The awareness that, no, this is real, I have to keep on thinking about this, that can really keep us stuck. So, for ourselves permission to lots this is quite CBT, can be really helpful to think, if you child in the saviour complex where they're sort of rushing around trying to do everything, they think that all the responsibility is on them. That actually makes, it's not healthy, really. And it's not helpful, and it can be really nice actually to run through some of these with young people. If you want to explore this more, again, I've got a whole guide working with eco-emotions, exploring these different tools and techniques in a bit more detail. As I said on the previous slide, it is super important for us to do this work with and for ourselves first, before attempting to support children and young people. I'm going to try and speed up then. So, just a couple more slides. Moving up the ARC framework, the very top of it is this competence piece. And for me, this is kind of like Maslow's self-esteem, self-actualization pieces as well, which is what are the skills young people need to engage in the world as it is today, not as it was 50 years ago and what they're taught in schools. I'm talking about current day issues. Now clearly there's going to be some need for age-appropriate consideration of how we do this, but these are some really quite sort of meaty pedagogical points that I think we need to be engaging young people in more so that they feel equipped to enter the world. Because that is another job of the attachment relationship, right, is helping young people develop the skills that they need to get by. So, yeah, there's clearly a massive curriculum expansion requirement here to include things like AI, climate justice, and theories of social change, which can actually be really inspiring. We need to be able to navigate misinformation. Actually, I think that's probably the most important commitment. And yeah, I think we need to also be modelling more of a tolerance of uncertainty, the ability to pivot and roll with big changes, to cope with loss and to regroup, and the skill of finding a new way forward. I think that's going to be really important more than ever. Other skills, critical thinking, empathy, listening to each other, and debate. Here on the right hand side, I don't know if you can read that, but I went into a school the other day, and I was so impressed that they had these beautiful debate boards up by age group, really encouraging children to think more broadly than the curriculum. So, this question down here, are all people, what makes a successful civilization? We need to be able to think outside the systems that we're currently stuck in. We need to be able to learn to listen to each other and to think perhaps about the kind of world we do want to live in. So for me, another big point is conversations about want versus need, or excessive consumerism in the room. Let's talk about it with young people and see what they think. And down at the bottom now, I will say this, but I do think there's, as young people ask, why are people not doing enough? It's going to be really helpful for them to understand the human brain, essentially, and why it is that we're in this situation. So again, I've got this free guide up on my website about the psychology of engagement. So that's both denial, cognitive biases, but also the ways in which we can use our psychology to really motivate and empower people, and do so in a healthy way. Okay. So, there's my Maslow hierarchy, which really attempts to encapsulate a lot of what I've talked about, but it is, in essence, about being realistic about the state of the world and thinking about what children need at all these different levels and providing it as best we can. I will say thank you and leave it there with a bit of time for Q&A. Sorry, that was very fast, but I was trying to make up for lost time.
Any questions?
Thank you for the insightful presentation and discussion. I was particularly impressed with the
Sorry.
Nice image, can't quite hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for sharing us your experiences. I was particularly impressed with the ARC framework, and because it gives us hope and gives us a way to chart forward. What we do as a foundation is very much providing the tools for such a framework. And my question is very much where you presented the oxygen mask principle, that we first need to take care of ourselves, which is very much what we believe in, before taking care of the child. So my question is, first and foremost, what happens if we don't take care of ourselves, and when the children recognize, and what impact will it have if they realize that we ourselves are not in place?
Thank you. Yeah, great question. Just to check I've heard it right, is with regards to the oxygen mask, what happens if we're not taking care of ourselves first? My answer, because there's not much research on this, right? This is a relatively new topic, so my answer is more based on what I would best guess. But it is, so in my experience and from what I can see, is if a person isn't engaging in the work of their own psychological and physiological responses to the knowledge of climate change, then what can happen is it's so, if you believe the science, the knowledge, and if you understand the interconnection of everything, what we're actually facing, that's so difficult that we just want to avoid it. And we do so by putting our heads in the sand, engaging in denialist mechanisms. There are over 150, maybe 120 to 150 different cognitive biases that prevent us from thinking clearly, and we all fall into these. And that's a whole other talk for another day, but that's super common. And so is engaging on the, that's why there are so many is online and reading it. That's all. It's a way of, so that we don't have to engage in reality. You've got the other side of overwhelm, where people overdo it, and this is what I'm more at risk of nowadays, is throwing all of my energy into trying to save the world, and that can lead to burnout as well. So if we're trying to support a young person, clearly, if we're in the more the void state, we're going to be invalidating their reality. That's a moral injury, that's that betrayal piece. And then I think if we're in the overwhelmed state, we're going to be, our actions are going to be infused with that anxiety and that fear. That's the piece that I think can lead to this sort of inspired. A little too much. So for me, if I'm having a flare-up of difficult feelings, because we do, you see something on the news, and for me, it really can affect me. Like the elections, that really affected me. I will actually try and clear my diary and not then try and support the young person, because I don't want to unconsciously pass on my anxiety. Clearly that's not always possible, but I think even if you're a teacher, and I used to be able to teach, perhaps just feeling anxious today, maybe let's do it. Whatever it is, I think we need to of our own state. Soothe it and get into a better place. What to do, children and people. Did that answer? Sure, at this stage, I just want to
We have another question.
Hello, Louise. Thank you very much for the inspiring presentation. It opened up, my mind about the intergenerational relationship and also climate change. So thank you very much for your interesting presentation. So I'm Ruby Chow. By background, I'm a social work and social policy background. So I'm more interested to look at these intergenerational issues in a wider context. So if we use the cohort theory, so we will know that all the generation may belong to different cohorts, and each cohort will experience or they have some shared challenges. So I mean, like for our generation now, I mean the adult generation, maybe our challenges are about economic growth and starting to look at climate change or social justice and those kind of things. And then my parents' cohort, they may experience other things like the after-war struggle with their survival and whatever. So I think if we kind of put these two generations, the current intergenerational relationship between like the adults and non-adults, if I can just classify them, in this way. So maybe we need to look at, what our life course or the cohorts before us, what challenges we are facing. So because all of us have limitations. So 20 years ago, we were not aware of climate changes, right? So we have our challenges to cope with, to deal with. So that is my first question. So if we put it into a longer historical perspective, so each cohort may have different challenges, and each cohort will have different limitations. So would that help to understand more about this intergenerational relationship instead of putting them into two separate categories, adults and non-adults, and see how the tension between them? So maybe we will have a more longitudinal perspective to look at how different cohorts are actually coping with the challenges. And then my second point is about, relating to the first point. So I appreciate very much how this generation, this adult generation, can help younger children, younger people to establish attachment and so on and so forth. We try our best to support them. But at the same time, I think young people nowadays, they are very, very smart, I have to say. So there may be something mutual that we can do. So on top of what we are trying to support them, maybe we can also appreciate, encourage them to appreciate, actually different cohorts have different limitations. Say, for example, I will appreciate that my parents' cohort, so they have a lot of limitation as well. They only know what they know when they are, when they are working or whatever. So for our generation, the adult generation now, so we may have the same problem. So instead of just trying to support the younger generation, should we also encourage more mutual understanding? Yeah, so that is my point. So 2 points is the first one, different cohort have different limitation challenges. The second one is a mutual understanding rather than just, support from the older generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such a valuable perspective from a talk, but in other talks then. Teaching, what's the word? Understanding, as you said, like allowing young people to experiences of older generations, because that's is understanding where we're all coming. Just different generations have different, yes, and there are examples of different social challenges in the past, inspiring and kind kind of see a way forward. You know, like civil rights movement, or how we sort of bridge just a ozone layer, or the nuclear proliferation treaty, you know, because of humans overcoming. That's a really important part of it. I feel like we've got a lot more of them now. But that's up for debate. Yeah, I 100% agree. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Louise, which has really got nothing to do with your presentation today. But at this moment in Baku, in Azerbaijan, there is the COP meeting on climate change. I'd like to ask you the question, why have so few heads of state decided to participate in this important conference?
Do you mean the one this year?
The one that's going on at the moment in Baku, in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I'm not leading, but from what down COP, proceedings are becoming more and more of a joke, insofar as if they're being run by sort of head of state companies with a vested interest in, you know, keeping the fossil fuel industry going. Of course they're going to be compromised, and we have seen that in the outcomes of COPs in the past. And while I put in the in the Paris Agreement, I think it's super co-op and occurring that there is some level of corruption, or the COP process is not working as well as it should do. So I don't have a good answer as to why they're not, but well, I know there's different reasons for different countries perhaps, but it is because the way that these fossil fuel industries are submitting them.
Thank you.
Well, wasn't it yesterday or the day before, the head of ExxonMobil was saying that they wish that America would stay in discussions or something. It's just, I don't have a good answer for this. And but honestly, I don't get too involved in that arena.
Thank you.
Just the debate.
Any other questions?
Hello, excellent presentation, thank you. I'm a grandparent of two young boys, young men approaching their 20s. We have a fairly libertarian, liberal-thinking household. Both boys said if they were qualified to vote in the American election, they would have voted for Donald Trump, which somewhat horrifies me, but I think it's a trend. And I wonder whether that comes into that camp of denial or tribalism, thinking that, you know, the right-wing tribe is going to is stronger and going to succeed and take over or whatever. But that attraction to authoritarianism from young people is quite. I think it's gaining momentum. And I find it worrying. What are your thoughts?
It's crackly for me. I'm glad you're talking about Trump. So I'll just summarise what actual
Sorry. I was telling you a little story. I'm a grandfather of a couple of boys going on 20, almost in their 20s. And they were, and we have a fairly liberal household and family. and they were telling me that they would have voted for Donald Trump in the US elections were they able to. And I was just querying the attraction of authoritarianism. And both of these boys are well aware of climate change and so on and so on. Have we lost you?
Because it was still crackly.
Yeah, we'll give it up.
Louise, are you there? You are there.
I got the gist.
You got the gist.
Can you both hear me? Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I got the gist. Trump. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting debate, and I hope you guys continue this debate. I don't show you that. I don't have a strong answer, but I think understanding the psychology of people and why they vote the way they do is so key. And if we look at the demographics of people that did vote for Trump, it is the sort of, there's a lot there about male identity and the sense that the system isn't working for them, and so they're seeking this strong man to protect their rights and to secure them things they need. I don't know, I really can't speak for, there's so much to unpick there, but I think I would love to dive into it further. I wish I was there in order to do so, actually. The other thing to hold in mind is your Trumps and your, people like Andrew Tate or even Jordan Peterson, these people who are influencing young boys, by and large, they do lie. They are misinformed. And I think, as well as understanding the psychology, we need to fall into ways to thinking. I think it's really important to try. They were trying to feel better. Easy answer. It's a lot easier just to run with that. And if the minute we start being like, oh, you're an idiot, you support potato, whatever it is, sorry if I'm making references people aren't familiar. The minute we do that, we're creating further division. So our job is really to understand where people are coming from without judgment, and try and find that shared. Like that's one thing I really struggle with personally.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Louise. We apologize if there have been some technical hitches, but I think your message came over very clearly. And we really appreciate all your explanations. And I think we should make a pledge here today. I think we should make a pledge, each and every one of us here today, to do something towards climate change. And thank you again from Malta. Pity you weren't here. Okay.